Have you ever caught yourself picking a side in a big corporate scandal, maybe without even knowing all the facts? We're all guilty of it. So today, we're going to do a little thought experiment about a fictional giant we'll call Big X.
You see this in the headlines all the time, right? Some massive company gets hit with a scandal and bam, battle lines are drawn. So this is the big question we're looking at today. What's your gut reaction? Who do you instinctively trust?
Now let's be super clear. Big X isn't real. It's just our hypothetical subject. A mega corporation, a total leader in its field. We're using it to build a mental toolkit, a way to think more critically when this stuff happens in the real world.
All right, so let's get into it. First, we're going to build the case against Big X. Picture this. The news breaks, and suddenly there's this tidal wave of accusations. This is one version of the story. The source material frames this in a really smart way. It doesn't ask what's true. It asks what's more probable. It kind of forces us to weigh the possibilities. So what exactly is Big X being accused of? Well, the allegations paint a pretty grim picture. The critics are saying Big X will do whatever it takes to protect that bottom line. We're talking about illegally covering up mistakes, maybe even bribing governments. They're accused of using their power to just steamroll any competition, either buying them out or just crushing them. It's that classic story of corporate greed,
But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's not even close to the real story?
Okay, let's flip this whole thing on its head. Every story has two sides, right? And the case for Big X says the corporation isn't the villain here. Actually, it's the victim. So who are these people making the accusations? The defense argues they're not brave whistleblowers. No, they're just conspiracy theorists, maybe paid attackers, or, disgruntled ex-employees who have an axe to grind. In this version of the story, it's the accusers who's on trial.
So now we have totally opposite narratives. Good versus evil, heroes versus villains. But which one is true? Well, what if thinking in such black and white terms is the real trap? Instead, let's consider three possible realities.
First up, we've got the ideal. In this scenario, Big X is basically a model citizen. It plays by the rules, makes the best products, it's doing everything right. And all the attacks against it, they're totally baseless, just driven by people with bad intentions. It's a clear-cut case of an innocent company being smeared.
Reality number two is the complete opposite. Let's call it the whistleblowers. Here, the attackers are 100% legitimate victims. They've been hurt by Big X, and they are bravely stepping up to expose the ugly, hidden truths. In this version, Big X is absolutely, undeniably guilty.
And then there's the gray area. And this is where things get really complicated and maybe a little more realistic. In this reality, Big X isn't a saint, but it's not a monster either. It does some things right, but it's also doing some shady stuff behind the scenes. And its critics, they're a mix too. Some are genuine victims, and others are just stirring up trouble for their own reasons.
This chart just lays it all out so clearly. You've got the ideal on one end, where the corporation is the hero. Then you have the whistleblowers on the other, where the roles are completely reversed. And sitting right there in the middle is that messy, gray area where nobody's hands are totally clean. It's just a powerful reminder that there's almost always more than one way to see the story.
So, where does all this leave us? We've laid out the arguments, the counter-arguments, and three very different realities. Now, it's time for the final piece of the puzzle.
And here's the kicker. The source material never tells us which reality is true for Big X, and that's the whole point. This isn't about solving a fictional mystery. It's about providing, as it says here, food for thought and judgment. It's about sharpening our own critical thinking skills for when we face these things for real.
And that brings us to the most important question of all. The next time you see one of those bombshell headlines, how are you going to react? Are you going to jump to conclusions? Assume it's either reality 1 or reality 2? Or are you going to pause, consider that messy gray area, and look for the evidence that separates the real victims from the fakes, and a simple mistake from something far more sinister? That's the real challenge, isn't it?